problem that is killing more people on Earth than any other are addictive consumption of toxic junk food. The American diet is really responsible for bad mood epidemic, obesity epidemic, diabetes epidemic, the increase in all these cancers that are specifically diet related. Their response to the early criticisms around this issue were that we don't make you buy our products, we don't make you eat it. But in fact, that was a lie. They already had a drug development technology going that was very successful, and they just applied it to snack foods. We're trying to restore the true full function of these 5 parts of our brains that are intended to make us happy. And there's a different nutrient that fuels each one of these brain functions. We saw immediate dramatic improvement to build the brain's supply of dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, the natural uppers. He did some research showing that if he gave people supplements of those nutrients, that the symptoms went away. They became cheery and slept well and could pay attention.
You don't find doctors prescribing tryptophan and 5-HTP. I remember when I was diagnosed with depression, they were quick to sort of, yep, here you go, SSRIs. I remember that experience and going, oh, this is not actually what health looks like in my mind. Even as a young man, I'm like, this doesn't resonate with me.
Aside from my soul.
Welcome back to the Inspired Evolution. And we have with us today, inspiring our evolution, Dr. Julia Ross. Julia, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. For those tuning into Julia Ross for the first time, this is going to be an incredible episode. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology and is the executive director of recovery systems. And she wrote the book, The Mood Cure, The Diet Cure, The Craving Cure. The Mood Cure was an absolute game changer for me and my partner. I absolutely love this book. And on the back of that, I'd love to dive deeper into that conversation. And yeah, just wanted to thank you and welcome you again, Dr. Julia. Julia. I keep calling you Dr. Julia because you were so helpful in my life. Literally more than I would say, just you felt very doctor-like in the way that the benefits that were espoused through your work. Thank you so much again for writing the book.
Well, I'm very happy about this book. It's been on the market for 20 years this year, and it's in its 39th printing. It just won't go. We get, regular emails saying it saved my life. However, in the last 20 years, we have kept moving, and we've got some new things that didn't show up in that book, many of which showed up in my most recent book, which is called The Craving Cure, which is specifically about the problem that is killing more people on Earth than any other, and that is our addictive consumption of toxic junk food.
Let's start with food, because you talk about the... You start with you called it the bad mood epidemic, and maybe let's start there actually. You've called it the bad mood epidemic. It sounds quite sinister, but I think when you're living, it's almost like a fish in water doesn't recognize that it's in water until it gets pulled out, and then it's like, I've been living in water. And I kind of get the feeling that most of us are probably struggling with some form of mood disorder or the other, but aren't necessarily aware of it. And yeah, your thoughts and, what prompted you to write the book in the first place, and even your subsequent books. Can you describe the bad mood epidemic so people can get a bit of a taste of what it is that you're trying to address?
Let's keep in mind, I was talking about the bad mood epidemic when I wrote the book, and it was published in 2003.
And things have gotten way better since then, right?
So we've got, the double whammy epidemics post-COVID. So it's more important than ever that people get the information that your interview is going to be exposing them to, our interview is going to be exposing them to, in terms of how I became aware of the earlier rise of the epidemic, I was fortunately born in 1945. And so I was brought up to walk down the street and hear people whistling. There really were barbershop quartets that sang outside and inside. It was just, people sang and they whistled and, they winked, and they, hi there, we were just, a cheery people pretty much worldwide. We were also a normal weight people. If you look at mass photography from the time, big groups of people, you'll see that nobody at any age, any race, was particularly overweight. And that all of that was held quite well right up until the 1970s, which is when the United States really launched into our new and, emotionally and physically fatal dietary change, which is now spread worldwide. The American diet, is really responsible for our bad mood epidemic and our obesity epidemic, our diabetes epidemic, the increase in all these cancers that are specifically diet related. There's just no question that some radical changes in the world's diet, not just in the United States, but occurred in the 1970s that have led to these multiple now epidemics. I was just finishing up a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I got an internship in an addiction treatment program.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't anyone who gets addicted who has dandy moods, We don't like substances unless they make us feel better. And we certainly don't get addicted to them and go through all the hell that entails unless there's something driving us that's terribly powerful. And that thing is our brain chemistry that is supposed to be producing positive moods and appetites for healthful food. And as I say, our brains were doing a very good job of it until this dietary tragedy occurred in the 1970s. So this was in the early 1980s when I became director of this outpatient program that I had started out as an intern in. And we were so terribly excited about all these revolutionary psychological techniques that we were, presenting to our clients, and they loved them. And but then we started working with a group that we couldn't help, and those were the crack cocaine addicts. Nationwide, 100% relapse within 24 hours of entering really good treatment programs. And so I personally went into a depression because I realized all the work that I'd done was against the wall. And fortunately, brain scientists who had been researching the addictive chemistry in the brain came around and lectured to us who were working in the field and said, it's not your fault. Your programs are beautiful, but they don't target the thing that's wrong, which is some very specific brain chemistry that is faulty. And one of them was doing some research on the use of nutrients, which the whole field of neuroscience knew were foundational to this particular type of brain chemistry. They knew that there were 4 or 5 nutrients that were just deficient when people became, depressed for no reason, tired for no reason, inattentive for no reason. And he did some research showing that if he gave people supplements of those nutrients, that the symptoms went away, that they became cheery and slept well and could pay attention. So I had a colleague in Minnesota. I was in California, and she was using a particular nutrient that was specifically identified as helping crack addicts. And I had a nutritionist on staff who was trying to help people with diet. It was doing nothing. And I said, let's do this unless your research shows that there's a downside to it. She did some research, said, no, let's do it. And from the very first person, we saw immediate, dramatic improvement just in that one amino acid that was targeted towards the brain's, to build the brain's supply of dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, the natural uppers. So I've never turned back. Now we work intensively with 5 different nutrients that target all 5 areas of the brain that are responsible for generating mood and appetite.
And I will ask you what the 5 nutrients are, but I do want to ask the question I was asking earlier, which is, what was it about the 1970s that changed the American diet? Because now it's called the SAD, isn't it? The Standard American
Yes.
Diet, which is an acronym, which is quite
very accurate. Well, I'll try and give it to you briefly, but I highly recommend that that your audience take a look at the first 2 or 3 chapters in The Craving Cure, because it gives all the details that are fascinating, really. So we noticed that this healthy American ideal that most people could identify with in terms of mood and energy and whatever was developing a flaw, and that was heart disease. So everyone knew that tobacco smoking was, a major, but there was a group of very influential nutritionists who decided that really fat was the problem. That we were eating too much fat. We really weren't eating any more fat than we ever had. We've been eating animal, fats, full fat dairy products for millennia. Actually millions of years. We've been eating animals. So even though it didn't make sense, he Ansel Keys was his name, and some cohorts who later turned out to be rather cozy with the sugar industry, which was booming at that time, was influenced the whole country into a fat-phobic state of mind. And we jumped onto the bandwagon of fat-free foods. So if you take away fat, you take away a lot of the calories that you need. Never mind the nutrients that are in fat. It's loaded with nutrients. We had to replace them with something. And so we replaced the calories with sugar. So all of a sudden, there were these fat-free cakes and fat-free cookies. And at the same time, we were in a big fitness push, and everybody wanted to carb load before their runs or, workouts or whatever. And it was a free-for-all. Go for it. And so we became addicted to these highly sweetened foods, which in the 70s were sweetened with something entirely new. A revolution had occurred in sugar science. They had figured out how to convert corn syrup in such a way that instead of being half and half glucose and fructose, it was now, they could decide how much of each. And they decided to boost the fructose because it was 10 times sweeter than the glucose, which is the sugar we're mostly familiar with in fruit, for example, and starch for that matter. So we became addicted to a new kind of sugar. There are some other factors, but so our fat, we reduced the fat, and then we switched to vegetable oil, which is really highly toxic, highly processed, and trans fats were made completely illegal, by 2018, I think it wasn't even supposed to be in any foods anymore, but we still are doing lots of other vegetable oils. And so we changed our fats, we increased the sugar and switched to a much more addictive kind of sugar. And we became so afraid of fat that we didn't even want to eat protein anymore. That's when the low-fat cheeses and milks and so forth took over, because we were so afraid of fat by that point. And when we stopped eating as much meat because it had fat, and as many dairy products because they had fat, our protein consumption dropped. And protein is the only source of amino acids. And amino acids are the most potent nutrients on the face of the earth, and they are what has allowed us to relieve people of so much, mood, emotional distress, and cravings for toxic food.
It's interesting as well,
I
because
think that's about the best I can do as a summary.
no, that's amazing. Thank you for keeping it so concise and yet so informative. It's interesting as well because the population of the world back then was half of what it is today. And yeah, I can imagine even in the decade before that, it was going through these leaps and surges. We were talking like 3.7 billion people at that time on the planet. And yeah, the mass agricultural practices have continued to develop. We use that as a word, put it in apostrophes a little bit over the time. It's interesting to sort of feel how these things that were intrinsically part of the natural food cycle, like you said, we've got proteins, we've got good natural fats coming from our food, and we've sort of bastardized them, and now we've sort of gone, okay, we're going to get more carbs in, and we're getting more of these artificial sugars. And somewhere along the journey of the sugars, you mentioned even the food scientists had determined this bliss point technology, whereby they knew that this was actually going to be the ratios of which would elicit the individual to basically
become
experience
addicted.
Yeah. In a way,
that was my profession, was addiction recovery.
Mm.
And here I understand that the largest industry on earth has made its primary intention to create addictive products that are going to destroy us, really.
It's a bit annoying because well, yeah, but let me describe precisely what but also the fact that if it was something else that was addictive, like if we've got substances that are addictive, we usually point the finger at the people that are producing the substances and the whole market chain that facilitates that substance coming to market. But with food, that isn't the case. You've mentioned this here and there in a couple of other interviews where, yeah, you've discussed how, just the fact that when you are addicted to food, the problem isn't the food suppliers or the food manufacturers. The problem is yours for not being able to control your appetite.
That was their most successful ploy. I don't know if you are aware that their response to the early criticisms around this issue were that we don't make you buy our products, we don't make you eat it. But in fact, that was a lie. Their technology was intended, and keep in mind that a lot of these corporations were purchased by the tobacco industry in the 60s and 70s, when they were getting in trouble because of their use of sugar, combined with tobacco to make people more addicted. So they just switched. They already had a drug development technology going that was very successful, and they just applied it to snack foods.
Okay. So this is frames up where we're at and where the issues sort of lie. You mentioned there are 5 key nutrients that help address the mood cure. Well, address the mood epidemic and like under the umbrella of the mood cure. Do you want to introduce us to them one by one, or how did you want to take us through?
Well, let
The
me
nutrients.
just say one thing to introduce it. Each
Mm,
one of these 5 areas of the brain that generate positive moods, I call those true moods.
true
And
moods.
true moods. And the kinds of negative moods that we experience these days, when those positive brain chemistry sites are under functioning, I call them false moods.
Mm,
So people might say, I tend to be so depressed, or I'm so stressed, or whatever. And I know from seeing thousands of people go from saying those kinds of things to saying, my life is the same, but I don't feel that stressed and I'm not depressed at all. So their true mood is restored. Their capacity to generate actual happiness, which is what the brain was really intended to do, in spite of what we go through on Earth and always have. It's always been difficult. Um, was phenomenal. So we're trying to restore the true full function of these 5 parts of our brains that are intended to make us happy in 5 different ways. So, and there's a different nutrient that fuels each one of these brain functions. So, um, would you like me to just go through one by one?
that would
Okay,
be
so
so amazing if you would be willing to take the time. Yeah.
so the first one, and the one that people with mood problems learned about in the early 90s, I would say, late 80s, early 90s, was
Mm,
um, serotonin, which was our natural antidepressant. And the reason that we became familiar with that word at that time was because Eli Lilly had created a new kind of antidepressant
hmm
um, that targeted serotonin and manipulated its function, um, so that a little extra serotonin was released. And a lot of people took Prozac, which was the first SSRI produced in 1997, and they did feel better.
mm,
Now, better means on a scale of 0 to 10. If they were at a 0 in terms of their ability to, feel good, um, they maybe rose to a 3. But the true mood that is depression free is a 10.
mm,
So if they had no capacity to generate any, natural relief of depression to start with, then we wanted to see whether we could get them to a 10, whether they were going to be fully functional as they often remembered being as children. So it turned out that there was already quite a market for an amino acid, which is a protein fragment. So in a steak, fish fillet, whatever, there are 20 different kinds of amino acids. And combined together in thousands and thousands of different ways, they create every tissue in our body, including our brain tissue. So brain science at that point knew very well which nutrient was needed to build more serotonin.
mm.
And that nutrient was selling like crazy in the new health food industry in the 80s. And it was called tryptophan. Subsequently, in the 90s, we got a second form of it through the supplement industry called 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan. And they both work really well at feeding just the one brain site, the serotonin producing brain sites, throughout the brain. So that's our first miracle, is to be able to restore our ability to feel positive about the future instead of worried, optimistic instead of pessimistic, instead of being irritable. We feel happy, and we can sleep well too. This is a marvelous chemical, serotonin, because it allows us to sleep well as feel well emotionally. So we knew immediately that we were onto something there, and science was fully in support. There was all kinds of research about its use as a supplement. So that's number one.
Can I just jump in there for one sec before you dive into number two?
Sure.
One of the key things that blew me away in your research as well was first of all, the side effects that SSRI have versus 5-HTP and tryptophan, like little to no side effects. And yet you don't find doctors prescribing tryptophan and 5-HTP. I remember when I was diagnosed with depression, they were quick to sort of, yep, here you go, SSRIs. And it wasn't 12 years later that I found your book. And the percentage difference between effectiveness of SSRIs versus 5-HTP or tryptophan is only 5%. And yet the myriad of side effects that comes with SSRIs is baffling that we wouldn't mainstream try amino acids first.
Let me say something here to sort of explain that, and stop me if you'd rather I not go in this direction. But if you had been around and depressed in the late 70s, early 80s, everyone would have told you to just go get some tryptophan.
Right.
In fact, it was the only nutrient that the psychiatric community knew anything about, and they loved it. No side effects. Fully effective for depression as well as for insomnia, but that fact made it difficult for Eli Lilly to sell Prozac when it first came on the market. And there's a very controversial event that occurred 2 years after it came out on the market and wasn't doing so well. A Japanese company made a bad batch and sent it to the United States, and over 1,000 people became either very ill and recovered, or very ill and never recovered. And that company later testified that they knew it was defective batch when they sent it. So everything else about that process, except the fact that the FDA stepped in and said, we're going to call for a voluntary ban of tryptophan, which then lasted for about 10 years. And so many companies suffered terribly because their tryptophan was confiscated. It was perfectly pure. This company that made the bad batch was not supplying most of the companies that were, offering tryptophan as a supplement. But it opened the door for not only Prozac sales, but all of the subsequent sales
that were developed, all the other, right. Yeah, because that, for me, experiencing the difference between taking tryptophan and my short little foray into taking SSRI when I was diagnosed with depression, it was night and day. It was night and day. So the SSRI felt amazing, but it felt synthetic. It felt really synthetic, and I love that you used the word true moods, actually, because I felt like I was up and I was bouncing and I was zinging and I was like, and then I came down 4.5 hours later. And I remember that experience and going, oh, this is not actually what health looks like in my mind. Even as a young man, I was like, this doesn't resonate with me. And I just from that point question whether I really should be taking them or not. But yeah, the tryptophan is very different. You take it, it's also quite instantaneous, the effects that you feel, but it's also I want to use the word subtler in its oncoming intensity, but it's also, yeah, it's much more organic feeling, and it feels much more wholesome and whole when you actually take it. I think the only way you can really describe it is the True Mood label that you gave it before. It's actually very accurate.
It restores the natural function, the full, beautiful natural function that we're designed to experience. Well, I'm glad that you finally have had that experience, and you can imagine once I discovered this, that I never let it go. I'm still talking about it, and raving about it, because it's, I sometimes say to people, I feel like I'm the goose. I'm sitting on all the golden eggs, and lots of people get better, but there's millions and millions of people who need it so badly. And the thing, one of the things that I learned, I wasn't trained as a nutritionist. I was a clinical psychology professional. And, but what I've come to learn, in studying these nutrients all this time, is that compared to vitamins and minerals and fatty acids, they are so much more potent, so much more powerful. So these other things are what they call cofactors that allow the aminos to form these extraordinary myriad, thousands of kinds of tissues in the body. Not that they aren't important, but compared to the potency of amino acids, each amino is capable of eliciting many positive responses. We're just talking about the emotional and appetite related responses, but it is true that because of their potency, we have to be very careful about dosing them with children. What we've actually learned is, more and more children are born to parents who are very deficient and depressed and so forth, and so they're born that way. And so we want, the parents get relief from the aminos, and they can see that their children are having some of the same symptoms that they had. And so what we have them do is just to take a pinch in a little bit of water, and the younger the child, the less, and for, infants through 5 years old, it usually the longest they would be on this would be a few days or a few weeks. And then you get the correction because they don't have years of deficit to repair. So once, teenagers, 14 and above, through, any age above that, they're unless they're known to be sensitive to, vitamins or whatever, are typically able to do the same dose as adults. So the supplement companies in general start their dosing at a standard that's, where one capsule really is a safe place to start for most people. And you can go up, you can go down, whatever works for you. And it's perfectly obvious on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're depressed when you start taking them, so for yourself, what would you say in terms of the 0 to 10 scale of improvement?
Oh, okay. So I wasn't really struggling with my mood significantly prior to starting. So I would say I was at a 5 when I started. Okay. And then this was the more recent research foray into the mood cure. But I had my reasons as for why I was going into the exploration and, trying to help others is a big part of what I do as a life coach and, just generally the inspired evolution. And I remember taking the tryptophan early, and I would say it went from a 5 to I would say, hand on heart, I could easily say 8.5. I want to say 9, but I also want to be, as yes, I would say 9, but 8.5 if I had to be conservative. So yeah, it was night and day though. Like I could tell, like me operating at 5 is probably me also just putting up with myself. Like I'm used to, right? So I'm probably not doing the mood cure, the honors, and the justice that it deserves. But yeah, it was quite because I also did it with, and we're going to talk about catecholamines shortly, but I also did it with the tyrosine and the GABA. The other thing that I think is not talked about is well, here in Australia we can't really access 5-HTP, but we can get tryptophan. And one of the interesting thing was, like, I've still got the first tub I bought for $60. Like it's been going, and I know 3 to 6 months is generally probably the accurate length of a protocol. But it's I haven't even made it halfway through this tub. Yeah, and I'm just also amazed at that because it's so much more affordable than modern pharmaceuticals.
It becomes irrelevant. You don't need it anymore after a time, because assuming that you are getting a good input of protein throughout the day, you just won't need it once you've built up your stores. And in fact, some people start not liking it. They get kind of sleepy in the day, and they say, I liked it when it made me sleepy at night, but happy in the day. Well, maybe I need to cut my dose. Maybe I don't need it at all anymore, So.
Is that what serotonin syndrome is? What's serotonin syndrome? This is me just asking out of curiosity.
Oh, good question. Serotonin syndrome just means there's too much serotonin being produced and activated. And that can happen with serotonin-targeted antidepressants. That's how we found out about it. And it's why we advise people, if they're on those kinds of serotonin-targeted medications, to be extremely careful. There's a whole chapter on it, actually, about experimenting with tryptophan or 5-HTP to see if it would work better. Before they go off the antidepressant, they want to be sure they're going someplace that's going to be a better fit. And so, 5 or 6 hours after the dose of the antidepressant, then it's safe to take a dose of tryptophan or 5-HTP without triggering any excess. Whereas if you took them together, you might get too much serotonin.
Yeah.
So we've done this thousands of times. And as I say, there's a chapter on alternatives to antidepressants in the mood cure about how you do this and how simple it is and how most people get, are like you, they get tremendously more benefit from the nutrient than from the medication.
Yep. And I promise I will let you move on to the next nutrient. Right after I just say this, though, when you go through the book, the way to sort of test yourself, well, not sort of, the way to test yourself is a quick checkbox hit list of, like, are you living under a dark cloud, as you call it, for serotonin? And it's just like boom, boom, boom. And you just answer a set of questions. And if you score above a certain number, there's a ranking for each of the numbers. It's just so straightforward. It's just so straightforward.
That questionnaire is available on my website now. Boom. So the mood cure, it's an actually updated mood cure questionnaire. And then we've got a different questionnaire for those people whose primary concern is to stop junk food eating. So that's awesome. Called the craving type questionnaire.
Okay, so I'll put a link to both of those on the show notes. The very first thing people will see are the links to the questionnaire, just so that you can go just see how you're faring and whether any of these nutrients could be of support to you. And like I said, they're affordable, side effects are very minimal.
And they kick in right away, so you know whether your investment has been worthwhile.
Yeah, it's ridiculously, I just can't believe it takes podcasts like this to bring information like this to the world. That's sort of what blows me away a little bit. Touchwood, like I said, I first came across your book in a Reddit forum. I was just researching another podcast and it popped up in a Reddit forum, and it wasn't somewhere mainstream that I came across this content. So yeah, here's me championing it to the best of my ability. Okay, next nutrient, please. Julia, I'll stop talking about serotonin.
Well, let's follow your trajectory then, and you can comment. So the next part of the brain that generates positive emotions and eliminates negative appetites is our natural stimulant system. So we actually produce, these three lovely activating of our physical musculature and of our mental energy and attentiveness and alertness and generally enthusiasm about life. We've had a number of clients who thought they were really shy until they built up the levels of the catecholamines, as they're called, this little family of 3 cats. I call them the cats.
Mm-hmm.
And when they took the amino acids that produced more cats, they actually became chatty. They realized, it's not an effort to talk anymore. So the nutrient that feeds this system is called tyrosine. And most people find it immediately energizing. And the amount needed varies with the person and their age and so forth. But it was the first amino acid that we ever tried because it's the one that's used for stimulant addicts to rebuild their tortured brain chemistry. Right. So we saw in the most depleted people on Earth immediate responsiveness. So ordinary people, who are more marginally deficient, love small amounts of tyrosine, but so that would be, 1 capsule, 500 milligrams, or less, depending if their sensitivity. But the crack addicts needed 4 capsules 3 or 4 times a day for a while. And then gradually they needed less and less until they were fine with a couple twice a day.
That's
and
amazing.
Usually they would need them for up to a year if they'd been heavily addicted and depleted. If you know anything about stimulant addiction, people don't eat, because they have this artificial energy. And so they had a lot of catching up nutritionally to do. And it could take a year, but they felt fine the whole year. It was just that after a year, they could give up the tyrosine. They really didn't need it anymore. And did you ever drink much coffee?
That is exactly the point I was going to make.
Oh.
So I, one of the occupational hazards, I'm not sure if it's occupational residential hazards of living here in Melbourne in Australia is I would say inarguably, but I'm going to say arguably just because people from all over the world tune into this podcast, have the best coffee in the world. We are coffee obsessed in Melbourne. And it suits the weather. It's always kind of dark, gloomy, and wrapping your hands around a warm cuppa. It just feels really nice. It's got a whole vibe about it. And so even workplace meetings, the culture, it's, you can end up going for 3, 4, 5 coffees a day, which is really, it's a lot. And these are barista made coffees. These are not just, teaspoon freeze dried coffees that you make at home. So they're quite intense. I think as an individual, what I've come to learn for me personally is that I'm extremely susceptible to caffeine. I have a certain sensitivity to it. Which working with the tyrosine actually helped me identify really well, because when I was drinking caffeine, the tension that my body would accumulate, especially in my neck and shoulders and traps, was quite profound. Like it was, profound. It was quite palpable is probably the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I would take caffeine and my muscles would tense. And I don't know if it's probably accompanied by dehydration. I'm also reflecting now on how acidic coffee really is when it goes into your system. And also
it stimulates adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone.
Yeah, right. And I can also tell, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion, I don't know enough about this, that being jacked into that adrenaline mode probably compromises my insulin, my ability to modulate insulin. And I think that also, I noticed for me, regulating weight whilst drinking caffeine was extremely difficult. It was just, weight would only go one way when I was drinking a lot of caffeine. And I remember when I first started taking the tyrosine, it was just, I'm even baffled now as I'm trying to describe it to you. I was baffled. I was completely baffled. Once again, I love the word true mood. I took it, and it, like you said, it was instantaneous. It's almost like and for me, tyrosine works a certain way where I don't even have to really swallow it to start to notice that I've taken it. It's made contact to my tongue, my mouth, and it's already starting to work.
Oh.
Right? So that's my relationship with tyrosine. And when I take it, I'm immediately like, it's like I've taken the most ideal pre-workout I ever could have taken, right? Which is, I'm clear. It feels very clean. There's no there's no spikiness to it. There's no jitteriness to it. When I first took it, I was probably taking a little bit more than I should have been. And about 4 hours later, I felt a little bit jittery, but nowhere near, I can't even say I felt jittery compared to what I felt after caffeine, So if caffeine was 100, this was like a 10, of jitteriness. And then I just dialed back. Instead of a teaspoon, it became a half a teaspoon of tyrosine. And which is exactly, the book steps you through this really well. It's incredibly well written. It's like, take this much and this is your body dose, figure out your weight, and based on that, this is how much you need. And if that's too much, just dial it back just a little bit. And that's exactly what I did. And the book recommends taking it twice a day. I just took it once in the morning, and it was everything I needed. It was everything I needed, simply because I wasn't willing to walk around with the tyrosine to the office or come back, etc., etc. So I just had it in the morning just for convenience sake. And the first few times, coffee just disappeared. Like, it just automatically just did not happen. I just went, and I didn't notice that it didn't happen until after a little bit. I was like, oh, it's been a week, I haven't drunk coffee. And the first thing I remember noticing was my neck and shoulders weren't as tight, because I was like, oh, like I'm feeling freer. And it's like, oh, I haven't drunk coffee. Oh, holy shit, it's the tyrosine. And I've ever since then, just been it's right up there with the tryptophan as one of my favorite amino acids to supplement, because it is just the energy, like you said, the enthusiasm. Sorry, I could talk about it forever. You're meant to be on the podcast. Please continue.
I'd like people to actually watch someone take it, and we have a YouTube series going now called Reality Research, to let people watch what it's like for volunteers to take whatever indicated amino acids they might need. The most recent one is specifically about coffee. And you can see her the first time she ever tried tyrosine and what her response was.
Oh, amazing.
So in her case, actually, tyrosine was not as effective as a supplement that we could talk about next, which is a supplement that raises our endorphin levels, because you talk about that warm feeling and the lovely smell. So there's a pleasurable aspect to caffeine, to coffee anyway, not only the energy. And so it turned out that this woman was really doing it more for the pleasure, because she did feel jittery at the end of the day, but she just couldn't let it go. It kept her going. So this third part of the brain that is so beautifully endowing of us produces feelings of pleasure. So it kills pain, but that's just the negative part of its wonderful attributes. What it stops emotional pain in particular, but even physical pain. is reduced by it. But what it produces in the positive sense is this feeling of enjoyment and contentment and comfort. And so, particularly when we talk about overeating, this is tremendously important. People are eating to get, they're eating comfort foods because they're
Right.
low in endorphin. They're not producing this beautiful part of the brain, chemistry. And so it's another one of these nutritional miracles. There's a supplement that will increase our expression of endorphin. And it does it in a little different way, but it's another amino acid. It's called d-phenylalanin. And I don't know if you can get it in Australia or not, but I hope you can. There's a combination supplement that's easier to get that's been around longer called DLPA that you might be able to access more easily. At any rate, this supplement has freed people from this particular kind of lonely, hurt, sad feelings for really no reason. When they come in and say they feel so lonely and this is the only thing that really makes them feel better, well, we say, well, are you lonely? Are you living alone? Or are you in a isolating relationship? And it turns out no, that it's a completely false mood, and their enjoyment of their partners increases, and of healthy food is restored. They enjoy healthy food again. They enjoy a sunset. They enjoy a shower. The things that we were designed to enjoy come back to them when they use this particular amino acid. Now they have to combine it with a really protein-rich diet, because it turns out endorphin requires between 5 and 19 amino acids of the 20 to build. So we've got to take in high protein foods. And for a while, we recommend that people take supplements. Some people who are particularly depleted take supplements of free form amino acids in capsules that are complete. So they have all 20 of the amino acids, which you can't get in most protein powders, for example. Only whey protein has all of the aminos in it. So that way they're getting it in the diet, they're getting it infusing all these nutrients they need to build up their endorphins. But with the DPA, everything improves immediately. They can't do without the DPA until they've built up their dietary protein intake. But then they don't need the DPA anymore, and they're on their own, feeling good again.
I love that. I haven't personally had an experience with DLPA. I don't know if it's available in Australia or not, but I will check it out. And yeah.
Well, do you want to move on to the GABA?
GABA's kind of cool. I don't want to sell endorphins short just because I experimented
I haven't
with
tried them.
them. So they probably deserve their own airtime. But yeah.
Let's go on to GABA, because it's it's hard to say, but stress is probably the most common complaint that people have in terms of their moods. They're just feeling too stressed, too much. And so the fact that our stress relieving chemistry can be restored by an amino acid supplement, instantly almost, is, it's really in the too good to be true department. There's probably some large percentage of your audience that's looking at this conversation, and if it weren't that you have actually experienced it, I'm talking about experiencing it with other people. And even though I'm talking about at least 7,000 other people, It's still too good to be true. But I would say that the GABA as a supplement is probably the most popular instant response that we get. And in terms of GABA, there's lots of choices there. And we really like the sublinguals because, as you explained, in terms of getting the tyrosine through your mouth, when you chew something, it gets absorbed in your mouth. And,
Right.
a little bit gets swallowed, but the tissues in your mouth, whatever gets absorbed there goes directly into the bloodstream instead of having to go through the digestive tract and then getting through the bloodstream and then to the brain. My most recent experience trialing GABA with someone was a man, 67, I think, long-term executive marketing person in big corporations, and gotten in the habit of staying up till 3:30, working or whatever, and somehow made it work. And in retirement, though, he couldn't slow down, and so he was still staying up till 3:30, and so he filled out the questionnaire, and the GABA deficiency part, the part of the questionnaire that people who are stressed tend to score so high in. His scores were very high, and so that was the first thing we trialed, and it was chewable. In the United States, we can send people trialing kits with samples of everything they might want to try, so that they can test first and then know what they're going to go out and buy.
Amazing.
Instead of buying a bunch of bottles, some of which they won't, end up using.
Yep.
So he had been talking very fast and, complaining about how stressed he still was and so forth. And then all of a sudden, and this has happened hundreds of times just in my experience, let alone the nutritionists who work for me, I was taking notes, and all of a sudden I realized he wasn't saying anything anymore. And I looked up, and he wasn't looking at me anymore either. He was looking out the window. And I said, Steve, what's going on out the window? And he said, I turned the sprinklers on this morning, and I just noticed that they make this whole rainbow as they go back and forth on the lawn. And from that day to this, it's been about 5 months. He's been enjoying the rainbow,
Literally and metaphorically.
He's sleeping well now. He's not getting into fights with his wife nearly as often. It's we've stayed in touch because he loves to send us updates, which we love getting.
Yeah.
So that's GABA, our natural relaxer, and you've had some experience with that, right?
Yeah, and it is sublimity. I would say it's just feeling sublime in like I've got the powdered version of it, but it's like you said, it just brings it's a really really nice feeling that GABA can introduce into your system if you're not used to it. And I'm not surprised this person that was super jacked actually came down, slowed down, took a moment, and especially the way you describe it in the protocol is to take it in the evenings, which is perfect. Someone comes home, it's now family time. That's kind of the headspace you want to be occupying, not really the office, daytime, workspace kind of headspace. And you're just much more comfortable to be around. But also, one of the things I think people in Inspired Evolution are used to as well is just you're more comfortable to be around for yourself as well. Like the negative self-talk, like the sort of inner sort of pow that we do to ourselves. GABA has been the one for me that sort of actually puts all of that to bay. That internal
Well,
sort of
to bed,
being.
you're talking about evening, relaxing and, moving, softly into the evening and getting to sleep and so forth. But we find that it's really important for people to use it in emergencies, after stressful or
Oh,
even preparing for something stressful. They
right.
find that their memory stays intact. They stay calm much more easily and clear. And that's all due to the fact that we know, scientifically that GABA neutralizes adrenaline. So this kind of stuff is eased and the brain can just slow down and enjoy this other capacity that it has. We've had a number of people who had the busy brain and they couldn't stop and they really wanted to meditate and they couldn't because it just wouldn't stop. With GABA, they're able to do it. They can access this calm part of themselves. Basically, we're back to true moods.
Can you overdo it with the GABA?
You can overdo it with any of them, and it's one of the benefits of them is that when you don't need them, it's any of it is an overdose. So if you take it and you think, "Gee, I'm not feeling quite as good," you stop taking it, and your true mood reasserts itself. So most people, do adults need to take it for several months. People who have been addicted or come from addictive families, sometimes up to a year. But there's an end point, where you could definitely feel too relaxed.
Noted. Sorry, I think many people tuning into this would kill for that. But yeah, I thank you for pointing that out. I'm conscious that when I humbly stumbled across the mood cure, I came across 4 nutrients, and you mentioned 5. So do you want to take us into the journey of the 5th nutrient? Yeah.
Yes, the 4 nutrients that we just talked to are neurotransmitter foods. So endorphins, serotonin, the catecholamines, GABA, these are all very special brain chemicals that transmit these lovely qualities to us. But there's one other function in the brain that can diminish all of them, and that is an experience of not having enough glucose in the brain to keep the neurotransmitters operating.
Right.
So this is a state called hypoglycemia, and there are probably 35 different false moods, negative moods that can result, as well as cravings for carbohydrates to provide glucose instantly. Because the brain is unusual. The muscle, for example, all over the body, the muscle stores glucose so that if the bloodstream doesn't have any, you haven't eaten, in a while, it can access this emergency supply, but the brain doesn't have that. So when the brain runs out of glucose, the trillions of cells, are going to suffer, and among them are going to be the neurotransmitters. So it turns out that there is an amino acid that converts instantly into the perfect amount of glucose if someone's levels drop too low. So they will instantly stop being in a negative mood, stop feeling stressed and frantic, and stop wanting to go out and get some sugar. And that amino acid is called glutamine. Glutamine, there's been a lot of research because it's a very good example of how rich the benefits can be from a single amino acid. It's been researched and is now famous for relieving chemotherapy caused neuropathy, which is the pain and numbness in the feet that is such a torment to people. Even when they're recovering from cancer, they can't walk comfortably. And for many of them, there's plenty of research showing glutamine eliminates it. Intensive care physicians love it because it preserves muscle mass in people who are too sick to eat, and they use it IV if they can't swallow it, as in water. It's very pleasant tasting, so it's not hard to do. Just to give you a few of the other benefits potential in glutamine. So we have a new section for the Mood Cure questionnaire on the website for those people who have hypoglycemic problems. So their moods nosedive and their cravings for junk food become uncontrollable. And glutamine is really the answer for them instantly.
Because we actually had some glutamine just lying around in the house, because my wife was actually taking it for some gut health stuff as well. It helps with a whole
right, it's wonderful for gut health.
Myriad of things as well. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear you share about what it's the hypoglycemia, and actually that it's got to do with a lack of brain sugars being or glucose being available for the brain. And just how that then sends us potentially, I'm imagining a little frenzy going on in the brain, looking to try and replete it.
Is a great word.
And then it's like okay.
And rages. It's a factor in so many domestic violence problems, for example. One of my colleagues was providing a series of classes for people who were, had been convicted of domestic violence, and was almost always with a spouse at home. And they were very bored with everything that she had to say until she got to hypoglycemia. And as soon as she gave them the list of symptoms and what caused it, and they all took time to track the last time the most recent time they got into a rage, and it was always when they'd skipped a meal. And so she advised them to carry whey protein bars, and it stopped. And they were coming in routinely, I'm not mad at anybody now. And it's made me realize I've got to eat 3 times a day. I don't, I can't be dependent on these little candy bars all the time, So
love that.
There's a lot of hypoglycemia going on, and one type of hypoglycemia, which is actually causing deaths, they're discovering now, is in people who have the bariatric surgery, and stomach surgery.
Getting it shrunk, right? Or just putting the band around it so it doesn't eat as much.
Yeah. So they can't take enough food in oftentimes to keep the glucose supply going, and they could be very comfortable for several years, and then all of a sudden get some often fatal blood sugar drops. So I don't know whether glutamine can be helpful for that. We haven't, worked with that. But the same thing is true for insulin-dependent diabetics, that their blood sugar can drop because of too much insulin. Their blood sugar goes down, but it goes down too low. And so people are dying because of that. And so I'm hoping that glutamine can be helpful in both those situations, but I don't know yet.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to dive into all of those. Generally a protocol, like I know everybody's different, and I know in the book it's been really useful to, it basically says there'll be a point where you forget to take them, and you're pretty much, as of that point, in a pretty good place, because you forgot to take them means you're probably good to go without them. And I
Right.
did notice that happening for me.
Uh-huh.
For me, that was actually I think it was about 4.5 month window. Is that usually what you find? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Like, is there? I know you can't answer, but is there a window that generally you see, like most
Well,
people taking the?
yeah, there's some things that we can definitely generalize
Mm,
uh, for very young children, a few days or
mhm,
a few weeks, under 5, and then from 5 to 13, say, um, a few months, maybe a month, maybe 2, but and then 14 all the way through adulthood, um, typically. Needing it for uh, between 3 and 12 months, depending on, are there some genetic factors that they don't produce
mm,
neurotransmitters so well, as well as dietary and stress and addiction factors. Um, but the average dose, uh, I would say, is 2 capsules 2 to 3 times a day for 3 to 6 months.
yeah, awesome. You touched on a point there, which is really interesting. Growing up and we had Dr. Bruce Lipton on the podcast, and he talks about epigenetics and the environments we grow up in, and whether
Hmm.
things are nature versus nurture, and it's really interesting to dive into that. And coming across this work, noticing that there are potentially, like, we just use GABA as an example. There are probably like gamma limited households, where there's been
Yes.
like, and just noticing that, okay, maybe this is like a hand me down thing, and potentially I can, work with it, yeah, to try and supplement something that's probably been carried down from generations, whether it's like in your cells or whether it's just something you've picked up, like, epigenetically from your environment.
Well, I remember
Nonetheless,
as a
yeah.
child going to visit my friends' families.
Hmm.
This was kind of new, to be in other people's homes, and
Yeah.
see how their families were. And there would be, families where everybody was really laid back and they just sit down and chat, and everybody was kind of like that. And then there would be others where they were, just, kind of on a time schedule and very efficient and not very relaxed, but they weren't unhappy.
Mm.
It was just a kind of a genetic tendency that they had.
Yeah, I find that really, really interesting. And just again, the potency of how we can potentially rewrite something that we feel like we've been, we may not even have a chance of getting over, when it feels like, oh, that's just in my family, like everyone's like that. That's how I am. And it's like,
Ah,
actually, it
no.
doesn't have to be, and I think that's the whole vibe around the inspired evolution, is that things are actually changeable. I I I don't know how to say this any other way, um, other than, in my humble opinion, when it comes to moods, Julia, I think the work that you've put together, I know nutritional therapy was not, your first thing, but I think you pioneered the use of it to actually target food cravings and all these ideas, like, related to mood, sleep, and addiction, and like making it as accessible as you have through your books. For me, it's probably some of the most important work that's happened in the 21st century for mood. And I want to thank you for sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today, to give us an
Thank
insight into the mood cure, and the 5 main nutrients that, and what they sort of frazzle out and drive, and what they look like when we're sort of not, supplemented correctly with them. But then also just what it looks like when we can actually come back from having taken just like quite a mild supplementation regime in the grand scheme of things, and what it looks like to come back into a true mood state. So, yeah, I could totally thank you for today and today's episode, but I also know it's, that you said over thousands and thousands and thousands of clients, myself included. I got to thank you for my own treatment and protocol that I put myself through, at the very least. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge you for your work, but also for who you are. And, I can imagine when you've been going through this work as long as you have, you've probably come up across a lot of people which have sort of, you've bucked the trend in many ways, even though it's been so organic, your path. And I just want to, acknowledge you for all the work you've put into this and extend my deepest gratitude for your work and you.
Thank you, Amrit. I appreciate that very much.
Awesome. Hey there, Inspired Evolutionary. If you absolutely loved this, well, then here's a full conversation on the Inspired Evolution podcast. Check it out now.